Chapter 16, Angels Every Day, an excerpt from the chapter, Angels at My Fingertips. Hello there. I'm talking to you, whether you're sitting in a chair or in your bed or on a bench in the park. Maybe you are on holidays and you are reading this book. Yes, I'm talking to you. Many of you ask me this particular question, and you may have it at the back of your mind now. You want to know how you can feel the presence of your guardian angel. Many times I've answered this in different ways because all of you experience this communication differently. Everyone's guardian angel communicates on different levels with a person. It is your beautiful soul that God has appointed your guardian angel to look after you. Your soul draws your guardian angel to you. Many of you may already know that some people will say that if they pray for help, for instance, if they're worrying about a job interview, they feel a tingle or a cool breeze, maybe on their face or on their hand. It might just be a sensation of peace in themselves for a brief moment. They could get an itchy spot on their little finger. That is the sensation of their guardian angel. Your guardian angel could be giving you these sensations to help you or to teach you to recognize them so that you can feel their presence. But one thing you may not have known, and that may be contrary to the norm or to everyone's expectations, is that there is not one human being in the world, no man, woman, or child, who feels the presence of their guardian angel through the exact same sensation. On different occasions, when I would watch someone's guardian angel giving a person that feeling of being with them, the guardian angel would always tell me, even if they were doing something as simple as blowing gently on a particular spot on a person's face, that no guardian angel's gentle blowing feels the same as another's blowing. I think that's incredible. Since I was a child, my guardian angel and I have always played a game. I play this even as an adult, and I know you can do this too with your guardian angel. We all can. So as you read this from this book, I want you to take in everything. I am saying this because your guardian angel wants to help you to feel its presence with you. I've been reminded to remind you that 99% of the time you feel the presence of the soul of a loved one that may be around you more than you would ever feel the presence of your guardian angel. But your guardian angel can help you to feel its presence in many different ways. So many of you already know that it can be a sensation of tingling or a cold breeze. There are many other sensations your guardian angel can give you to help you feel its presence, so that you know that it is right there with you. You can play this game with your guardian angel at any time. Only the other day, when I went for a walk down the lane, I said to my guardian angel, "Let's play the fingertip game." These are the words I've always used since I was a child, because they are like the words my guardian angel said to me then, which were, "Lorna, let's play a game." In a sense, I didn't need to learn to play the games like these, but I would come to realize that the angels had taught me these games so that I could teach everyone else. "What game?" I asked my guardian angel. My guardian angel answered, as it raised its golden hand and moved its fingers in slow motion, "The fingertip game." I repeated my guardian angel's words, "The fingertip game." While giggling, I said, "That name is funny." This is the same game I played with my guardian angel the other day as I walked down the lane. I asked my guardian angel, "How can I explain this lesson to the readers?" My guardian angel said, "Get them to stand in front of the mirror. Let them say hello to their guardian angel." I replied, "That's a good idea, for them to use the mirror. That is what I want you to do. Stand in front of a mirror, ready to move your left hand or your right hand, whichever one you write with. As you stand there, look at your reflection in the mirror. Now raise your hand. Have your hand stretched out and your fingers spread out a little so that your fingers are not touching each other. Look at the reflection of yourself in the mirror and imagine your reflection is actually your guardian angel looking back at you, and that your guardian angel has its hand at the same level as yours. The first thing that your guardian angel needs you to do is move your hand slowly towards the mirror, coming close enough that you can touch the reflection of the tip of your finger and feel that gentle touch of the mirror itself. Move each finger one at a time, just tapping and holding for a moment, or as long as you want, the tips of your fingers on the mirror. Make sure you are tapping the reflection of your own fingertips, but imagining at the same time that they are the fingertips of your guardian angel. You may have to do this many times. In between times, when you're playing this game with your guardian angel, you may start to feel whatever sensation your guardian angel gives you to help you to feel its presence. When you are ready, you can stop playing this game in front of the mirror. The next step is to ask your guardian angel to stand in front of you, and they will do so. Imagine your guardian angel standing there just as you imagined your own reflection in the mirror was your guardian angel. Keep the same distance between yourself and your guardian angel as you did with a mirror. Your guardian angel will be standing right in front of you. As soon as you raise your hand, your guardian angel will have their hand right in front of yours. So start feeling your guardian angel's fingers. You may feel nothing at first, but I promise you that over time you will feel a sensation of some kind, maybe even more than one sensation. When you tap the tip of your guardian angel's finger with the tip of your own finger, hold it for a moment. Allow yourself to make that contact. Then take that finger away and tap your next finger. Don't forget the thumb. You can start with your little finger or your middle finger or your thumb. Your guardian angel doesn't mind which finger you use first. It is a wonderful game. You may find that you smile, laugh, or that a funny thought comes to your mind. These responses are all because, by you and your guardian angel tapping fingertips, your guardian angel is helping you to become aware of your senses so you can feel its presence. Some of the sensations your guardian angel may give you so you can feel its presence could be a tingle or an electric shock, ever so gently or very strong. It might even make you jump. If this happens, say thank you to your guardian angel. Talk to your guardian angel by saying, let's play again. You can ask your guardian angel to be a little bit gentler or maybe a bit clearer. Remember, the way your guardian angel communicates with you may sound the same to you as what you hear in an account someone else gives of his or her experience. But as I said, they are not. I always laugh when my guardian angel gives me a really strong electric shock going through my fingertip from theirs. It doesn't hurt as you move along. Doing this with your fingertips, you may feel as if you are touching something so soft you cannot explain it. It might be like something hot that feels like a burn, as if you'd put your fingertip over the flame of a candle, or as if you were touching an ice cube. There are many different sensations your guardian angel could give you, but then again, it may only give you one. No other man, woman, or child can feel that sensation in the same way you feel it. You must get to know the sensation really well, become connected to it, so you can really feel the presence of your guardian angel. It's not a one-off game. Your guardian angel is helping you to work on that sensation, to make it stronger for you, to feel its presence. To feel the presence of your own guardian angel, not of any other angel. As I moved the mouse attached to my computer, my guardian angel put its beautiful hand above mine and whispered in my ear, "Don't forget, Lorna, that they must do this continuously through their life. Everyone's guardian angel can teach them many things to help them through life." I said to my guardian angel, "Do you think that the readers can do this?" "Yes, Lorna. I know that you know all of your readers can do this, and that you have no doubt whatsoever. You know that their guardian angel is real, just as they are, and that is why they can do it." "Yes, they can," I said, as my guardian angel lifted its hand slowly away from mine. My guardian angel said, "Lorna, say the thought that has crossed your mind, personally to the readers." "Okay, this is to the readers then. I know all of you can do this. I have no doubt whatsoever. Your guardian angel is real, just as you are, and that is why you can do it. Your own guardian angel will keep on reminding you. You can learn how to feel the presence of your own guardian angel. Remember, your guardian angel can be no one else's guardian angel, only yours. Your guardian angel belongs to you." Chapter 15, The Power of Prayer. Angels in My Hair. I became pregnant again. I was 25 and Christopher was 2.5 years old. And this time, the first 3 months of pregnancy were great. I had no morning sickness. One morning, I decided to stay in bed with Christopher beside me after Joe had gone to work. I woke an hour or so later. Christopher was fast asleep, and I gave him a kiss and slipped quietly out of bed. I walked into our little front room, and there was Angel Hostess, sitting in a chair. He told me to sit down. Angel Hostess, don't tell me something is wrong, I said. No, Lorna, it's nothing serious. There is a mark on the baby's left side. The doctors will be concerned and will send for a specialist from another hospital. You must remember it will be okay. Your baby is perfect, but it just wants to be born in a hurry. The little baby is impatient for you to hold him in your arms. We angels and your baby's guardian angel will do everything to keep your baby where it is meant to stay for as long as possible, right in there. Lorna, Angel Hostess, reached out and touched my tummy, and I could feel the baby move. My baby knows you have touched my belly, I told Hostess. I felt my baby move when I was 6 weeks pregnant, but my doctor said that was impossible. I know it's not. When I stand in front of the mirror, I sometimes ask God for a peep, and then I can see all the energy spinning in a whirl. Sometimes it opens for a moment and God shows me that my baby is perfect. I asked Angel Hostess, why does my baby want to come before it's time? He didn't answer my question, though instead he told me, you are going to have a hard time from now on, and you will spend most of this pregnancy in the hospital. A few days later, I went to the hospital for a scan and I could see my baby. You seem to have a very active baby, the doctor said. Everything looks fine. He's no bigger than my thumbnail, but his legs and arms are moving. He even opened his eyes and put his thumbs up to his mouth. The doctor decided that I should stay in the hospital for a few days' rest, and I was brought up to the ward. Joe went home, but returned that evening with the bits and pieces I would need. I ended up staying in the hospital for a week, and when the doctor said I could go home, I felt very happy and well. I was home for only about 2 weeks before I was back in the hospital again. Mom took care of Christopher so that Joe could continue going to work. He had recently got a job with a local county council. Christopher fretted a lot, and it was not easy for Mom to console him, but Joe could call to my mom's house after work before coming to the hospital to visit me, and at weekends Joe kept Christopher with him. Back in the hospital, I was on a drip and not allowed out of bed. The doctors couldn't understand why I kept going into premature labor. I spent the remaining months of the pregnancy in the hospital. During the week before Christmas, when I was 7 months pregnant, the wards were emptying and everyone was sent home who could be. It didn't look like they were going to let me go home, but I kept praying to God that I could go so I could be with Christopher and Joe for Christmas. Christmas Eve came, and just before lunch, one of the doctors came over to my bed and told me I could go home for 2 or 3 days on the condition that I came straight back if I felt unwell. That evening, Dad drove Joe and Christopher to the hospital to collect me, and I was feeling great. When we arrived at the cottage, it looked so homey. Elizabeth, our wonderful neighbor, had kept the fire going. Before Dad left, he told us that we were invited for dinner on St. Stephen's Day, the day after Christmas, and that he would collect us at about 12. Christopher went out with his father to close the gates as his granddad drove away, and when they came back in, I was sitting comfortably by the fire. Christopher sat on my knee, and I gave him a big hug while Joe made us tea. I really didn't remember much about that particular Christmas, nor do I know how Joe managed. I only remembered hugging Christopher by the fire that evening and then being at my mother's on St. Stephen's Day, saying I wasn't feeling too good and asking Dad to take me back to the hospital. He did, and 2 weeks later, as I was going into the 8th month of pregnancy, my second son, Owen, was born. Believe it or not, he weighed almost 8 pounds despite being 4 weeks premature. I don't know how Mom and Dad became involved in prayer groups, but they did, and the prayer work seemed to have a great effect on my dad. He started to help people. He always had done, but now he helped people even more than before. If he had heard anyone was in trouble, he would do what he could to help. One particular evening, Dad came up to the cottage and asked us if we would like to come to the prayer group down in Maynooth College that evening. Maynooth College was one of the biggest seminaries in Ireland at that time, so there were always a lot of priests and student priests around. I looked at Joe and we both nodded. I was thrilled at the opportunity to get out of the house, and I was also fascinated at the prospect of praying in a group. I've always loved churches, and I went to Mass whenever I could. "What are these prayer groups like?" I asked. "We have the use of a room in the grounds of Maynooth College," Dad replied. "We prayed together and read passages from the Bible. Then we can ask the group to say a prayer for our families or for someone else who's in trouble. After the prayer meeting, we usually have tea and biscuits and chat and socialize with each other." "And make new friends," I said. Elizabeth said she would babysit for us, and from that day on, Elizabeth babysat for us every time we went to the prayer meeting. I loved that first prayer group, even though, to be honest, I was so nervous that I remember little of it. We did, however, become regulars, and we tried to go as often as possible. Prayer is extremely powerful. When we pray, we don't pray alone. Our guardian angel always prays with us, and so do any other angels who may be with us at the time. Even loved ones who are already in heaven join with us when we pray. Nothing is too small or trivial to pray for, and no prayer is too short, whether it is just one word or many words. We can pray anywhere, driving in our cars, when out walking, during a meeting, in a crowd, or on our own. Sometimes we pray without even realizing we are doing so, especially when we are thinking of a loved one who is sick or a friend who with difficulties. When a prayer comes from the depths of our being, it is incredibly powerful, and a person's religion or creed doesn't come into it. God hears the prayer of all of his children equally. Prayer is especially powerful when a group of people pray together in the same place, as we did in the prayer group, or if people from all over the world pray for something specific at the same time. Such prayer causes a tremendous intensification of spiritual power. We always enjoyed the walk down to the prayer group. Joe would talk about different things that were happening in his job at the county council, and we would also talk about the prayer group. One Wednesday, as we were walking down to the meeting, I talked to Joe about my hope that it would be a big group that evening. It was usually about 10 people, and sometimes, especially in the summer, it was even smaller. When holiday time was over, the prayer group would start to grow in numbers, and sometimes, because of this, it would be moved from one end of the campus to the other. Da went to a lot of prayer groups, but he had been to only a few in Maynooth. He had brought us to our first one, but he hadn't been often since. So this evening, I was delighted to see him and hurried over to say hello. We walked up the steps together and through the door and into one of the rooms on the left. There were some people there and about 20 chairs in a circle. We said hello and sat down. Almost all of the chairs were taken. More people then came in, followed by a priest who introduced himself as Father David. He then asked whether the group minded if the seminarians and nuns joined the prayer group that evening. We all said in chorus that they were welcome. As there were already about 20 lay people in the room, he suggested we find a bigger room. Within minutes, he was back, saying we had a bigger room in a building that wasn't directly attached to the college, and we should bring the chairs, including the ones stacked against the wall. Everyone got up to help. The next room was much bigger. Soon, a lot of young seminarians started to arrive, together with some priests, maybe about 7 of them. Some nuns arrived too, along with a young girl who was staying in the nun's house on the campus. More lay people also arrived. The room was very vibrant and full of light. I saw several angels, although not very clearly, and my soul was jumping with joy. My angels were whispering in my ear that someone very special was coming. "I know," I said. "I know who's coming." I wanted to jump for joy and tell everybody, but the angels stuck my feet to the ground, so I could not move. "No," they said. They would not believe you." I was standing to the right inside the door with my feet held fast to the floor, watching the chairs. The chairs were arranged in concentric circles, and as the group kept getting bigger and bigger, the chairs kept being moved around. I could see the original idea of circles of chairs was now out of the question, and instead of an oval shape was being formed with 5 or 6 ovals of chairs starting from the center and getting bigger by the minute. People were still coming in carrying chairs. Joe called to me to come and sit down beside him. There were now 6 complete ovals of seats around the large room. The angels released my feet so I could move. I could see the empty chairs beside Joe, but finding my way in was a problem. Some people got off their chairs and moved them back so that I could get through, and eventually I got to my seat and sat down beside Joe. John, one of the lay people, welcomed everybody to the prayer meeting. Then everyone started to praise God out loud in their own words. People prayed in the way they felt like, in the way that was meaningful to them. The atmosphere became highly vibrant and electric, and with the beating of the angels' wings, the light was also becoming radiant. I praised God with my whole heart and soul, and I wanted to close my eyes, but the angel said no. As they shaded my eyes, I could also feel angels' hands under my chin, holding my head up. I was starting to go into ecstasy. Everyone around me had their heads bowed. They were all in prayer and giving praise. In front, behind, and at both sides of each person, angels glimmered. The room was enveloped in angels. From the floor to the ceiling, I do not think there was any space that was not filled by an angel. Then one angel whispered in my ear, "Listen to everyone, Lorna." I did, and it was unbelievable. I could hear everyone individually. Some were praying in tongues. Others were repeating prayers over and over again, and some were singing hymns and praising God from the depths of their being, from their souls. Slowly the angels allowed my head to bow a little, and I could no longer feel the chair underneath me. I asked the angels not to let me close my eyes as I gave praise and thanks to God. The angels whispered in my ear that they would close my eyes only a little. Then the room grew silent. The angels fell silent. A cloud of brilliant white light, alive with life, gradually engulfed the room, surrounding everything and everyone, purifying and cleansing everyone and everything in its path. From this cloud, in the center of us, God as a young man materialized and became visible. I recognized the very powerful presence as the one I had encountered that day as a child in Mount Shannon as I walked to my granny's house. The young man, God, was dressed in a white robe. The tip of his toes had a golden appearance. His arms were down by his sides, his hands open, pointing downward, and beams of gold light flowed from his fingertips. His face shone and his eyes were bright, radiating the eternity of life. His hair came down to his shoulders and was curling and bronze in color. But how can I hope to describe a brilliant, radiant light, all life itself, full of love, compassion, and hope? God turned slowly to face everyone, without movement, as we know movement. God moved among the people sitting in the inner oval circle. The people were giving praise and thanking God in silence, in meditation, in prayer, oblivious to him. As God moved among the people sitting behind me, I could feel him. His presence was extremely powerful. I was filled with a peace that dwells in my God. My prayer was this: if only God could stay and walk among us like this all the time. When I finished my prayer, I felt the touch of his hand on my shoulder. God touched my soul physically in this radiant light. How can I describe what my soul saw? Purity in all infinity, clarity in full. Then in a flash of light, God was gone, and the room was normal again. My eyes were fully open, and I saw the cloud of beautiful, radiant life. The radiance of God's presence walking among us was gone. I smiled with tears in my eyes. A moment or two later, everyone stopped praying and lifted up their heads. Someone spoke and said that praying and meditating in a big group filled them with unbelievable joy and peace. Then a young priest, I don't know whether he was a priest yet, he might have been a seminarian, spoke. He had light brown hair, was not very tall, and had a bit of a beard. "Did anyone feel it?" he asked. I knew exactly what he was going to say, and I asked the angels, "Can I say it as well, that I felt it too, so that it would help him?" But they said no. "I felt God walk among us," he said, "and I felt him touch me. Did he touch anyone else?" I so much wanted to say, "Yes, he did. He touched me too," but I was told no, that I was to be quiet. And the sad thing was that no one else had the courage to say, "Yes, God touched me." No one else had the courage to acknowledge God. God had actually touched them. We are so afraid to say that God is in our lives. We are so afraid to acknowledge God openly, to speak openly. I don't know who the other people were whom God touched, but I do remember that young man. And even to this day, I hope that whatever he is doing, he keeps on acknowledging that beautiful thing. When the prayer meeting was over, we had the usual tea and biscuits. Meanwhile, I slipped outside to the car park with my drink in my hand. I went over and walked between some small trees. I was still shaking with excitement, and angels walked around the trees with me. I know that young man desperately wanted acknowledgement. I said to the many angels around me, not talking to any one angel in particular. I asked the angels and the young man's guardian angel to help him to keep his faith, his belief in God, regardless of whether he became a priest or not. I asked them, what if I share with Joe about God walking among us and touching some of us? No, Lorna, that would be too much for Joe to understand, the angels replied. A time will come when you will share more with Joe, but you must remember not everything. This is one of the things you will never share with him. I felt a little sad. As I walked back toward the entrance, the angel Elisha appeared and held the door open for me, smiling. Don't be sad, she said, and she said that my sadness left me. I met Da in the corridor, and he said he was ready to go. I said I would find Joe and meet him at the car. We were home in a few minutes, and neither Da nor Joe said anything particular about the prayer meeting, so I believe they saw nothing. Chapter 16, The Tunnel, Angels in My Hair. By the time we had been living in the cottage for 5 years, the garden was in good shape. We were growing plenty of vegetables, and we had some hens. The only difficulty was finding where the hens had laid the eggs. Eventually, we fenced off the part of the garden with a big shed and used it as a hen house, and after that it was no problem to find the eggs. Joe always built a long clothesline for all the washing. I can still remember the day he made it, him standing on a stepladder using a sledgehammer and me holding the pole. We laughed so much. One afternoon, Christopher and Owen made a tent from poles, a blanket, and some string, and were having great fun playing in it while I was doing in the garden hanging out the washing. Suddenly, a big beam of light landed in front of my feet and hit me like a little slap, and I nearly fell over. It was Angel Hostess, of course. I laughed, knowing Hostess was doing this for fun. Lorna, I have something to tell you, he said. It will be happy and sad. God is sending you a little baby soul. You will become pregnant in the new year. But this little baby will not stay. It will return to God. I am sad already, I said. Why are you telling me this, Angel Hostess? Why don't you just let it happen and say nothing? It would be easier for me not to know. Joe will be delighted you are pregnant, Lorna, Hostess said. And when this little baby goes back to God, Joe will share in this in a little way that will help him understand your gifts. Do you think he'll understand? I asked. Yes, he will, answered Hostess. He'll understand. He'll find it a bit unbelievable in some ways, but as time goes on, he'll know that it's all true because of other things that will happen in your lives. It's now time for you to talk to Joe again. Okay, I will, I said. Maybe when I go for a walk with him later. The children were still playing in their tent and running around in the front part of the garden when Joe came home from work that evening. He opened the gate. Christopher and Owen ran to him. He picked them up in his arms and carried them into the cottage. Later that evening, I asked Elizabeth to mind the children while Joe and I went for a little walk. As we walked down by the canal, we talked about all kinds of things, and I said, I have something I'd like to share with you, something that the angels show me. I explained to Joe a little about the energy I see around plants as we passed wildflowers growing along the bank of the canal. Hold my hand, and maybe the angels will help you to see the energy around these flowers. I said as I held his hand tightly, look at the flower there. Do you see the way balls of energy are coming out of it? The flower is throwing off its own energy. Can you see the different colors, yellow, white, and blue? I turned, still holding Joe's hand and still asking the angels to let him see. Look at that red poppy. Can you see the spirals shooting up from the base of the plant about a foot into the air? They're like fireworks exploding, one following another, only lasting for a few seconds. Joe looked, but it was obvious from the expression on his face that he could see nothing, and that he even doubted that there was anything to see. My heart sank. Come on, said Joe, let's go home. Suddenly, angels appeared as if they had come out of the air above the canal. The angels blew gently into the direction of the flowers. Joe started to walk away. I grabbed his hand and said, Look at the breeze blowing the flowers. Can you see now, Joe? He stood in amazement, as if he was glued to the ground, and said, I've never seen anything like that before. He described for me what he was seeing. I smiled happily. This was the first time I had ever been given confirmation that others saw the same things I did. Joe stood smiling at me in wonder. Some things are hard to believe, but I know I shouldn't doubt you. He turned and looked again, and seeing that the energy around the flowers had disappeared, he was a little disappointed. I never understood it myself, I said to Joe. It's almost as if the energy turns on and off, only to be seen physically with the human eye at certain times. We strolled contentedly home, hand in hand. Joe and I put the children to bed, and later that evening we sat and talked. Joe asked me a lot of questions, and some I could not give answer to. As time went on, Da became involved with different prayer groups in Dublin and around where he lived, including the born-again Christians. Occasionally, when the children and I would be up visiting my parents, we would arrive as a visitor from the prayer group when they were leaving. One particular day, just as we reached the gate of my parents' house, the hall door opened and a man stepped out. He looked at us and then turned to Mom and asked, Who is this? Mom replied that I was her daughter and these were her grandchildren. He smiled to Mom that she'd bring us along to the prayer group one Sunday. I said hello, but kept walking with the children around to the back of the house. I asked Mom who the man was. She told me he was one of the preachers from the born-again Christian prayer group in Dublin. I didn't ask any more questions, and Mom didn't give any more information. Later, the children and I caught a bus back to the cottage in Maynooth. As I was washing up in the kitchen, I was keeping half an eye on Christopher, who was playing with toys on the dining room floor, while Owen slept on a blanket. I was thinking about our invitation to this different prayer group, at that moment the kitchen door gave a little creak and opened. Instantly, I knew it was Angel Michael. Angels do not usually intervene with something material that is happening in our world, but for some reason they frequently do with me, often in small ways, such as when Michael helps me to lift things and Hostess blows on the washing. One woman who I met years later described how she couldn't get a key to turn into a locked door when she was trying to help her elderly mother who was inside. This went on for some time, and she was desperate. She prayed to God and asked her angels for help, and suddenly the locked door opened without her touching it. This is what we call a miracle. We have no explanation for it, but we know we couldn't have done it ourselves. This is rare, but it is happening more frequently as people are evolving spiritually and are reaching out to the angels. Is that you, Michael? I called, without turning around from the sink. As he entered the kitchen, he touched my shoulder. Lorna, you called me, Angel Michael said. I didn't realize I had, Michael, I replied. You have not realized yet, he said, but for a long time now, you have not needed to call us by name when you want us. All of God's angels are with you all the time. How did you know then, Angel Michael, that it was you I wanted to talk to? I asked. Lorna, your human mind and soul are connected, Michael explained. Your soul knows all ahead of your consciousness that the human side of you needs to talk to me. I laughed at the idea of my soul knowing ahead of time, and Christopher called out, Mommy, what are you laughing at? As he got up and walked into the kitchen, Christopher put his hand over his eyes and said, Mommy, where did that bright light come from? I tickled him and didn't answer his question. Then I sent him back to play with his little brother. Michael, I said, You know, one of the things I love is going to the prayer group in Maynooth. I have met wonderful people there. Angel Michael gave me a big smile and said, "Tell me now what is really on your mind." I took a deep breath and told Michael about being in Mum's house in Leslip and about the man who had invited us as a family to this prayer group of born-again Christians in Dublin. "You know, I always feel nervous about having to go somewhere new," I said. Angel Michael started to laugh at me. He reached out and took my hand. "Lorna, you won't have to stand on your head or do anything like that," he said. "Don't worry." We both laughed. Michael continued, "Just remember, when you go to the prayer group in Maynooth, you pray and praise God. Do so the same way. Just be free, Lorna, in your prayer and praise. There will be a lot of families there, so in this way it will be different. When the time comes, Lorna, you will go as a family to this prayer group with your parents, but it won't happen for quite some time." As always, Michael was right. It would be many years later that we all went together, and when it did happen, it was a turning point in my life that brought me much closer to my Father. Christopher peeped in the kitchen door. "I can see the light again, Mommy." Angel Michael disappeared. I picked Christopher up and we played wheelbarrow for a little while. In the new year, just as the angels had said, I became pregnant. Joe and I were very happy about the pregnancy, even though my heart was heavy, because I knew that this little baby wasn't going to stay. When a woman becomes pregnant, the baby's soul already knows if its mother will miscarry, if it will be aborted, stillborn, or deformed. Regardless of what happens, the baby's soul still loves its parents and will always be by their side. It will be there to help them through life. If you have ever lost a baby, never forget that little baby soul chose you to be its mother or father. It actually chose you before it was even conceived. That little soul loves you and was full of joy that you were able to conceive it. In the Bible, you read sometimes that God already knew you before you were conceived. This is because we were already spiritual beings in heaven, where we were all queuing up to leave heaven and be born on earth. We have an awful lot of abortions in the world, but one must remember that even if a mother decides to have an abortion, that little soul already knows that its mother may do this. And even knowing this, that soul has already chosen this woman to be its mother, even if that means that the baby is only conceived and never actually born. The little soul has chosen that mother and will love her no matter what. It is unconditional love. I would like every mother to remember this, particularly any woman who has had an abortion. Maybe a young girl had an abortion because she was afraid of life, of the world out there, or maybe she was scared of her parents or felt that she had no one in whom to confide or who could help her. Remember that baby soul loves you and never for one moment holds it against you that you did not give birth to it. It already knew what would happen, and still it will pour its love onto you. Some years later, people started to come to me for help, and I remember a woman who sought me out. At one stage, she said to me, "I had a few miscarriages." "Yes," I said, "the angels are telling me that." I looked toward my kitchen door, and there, sitting on the floor, were 5 little children, 5 little souls surrounded by light, and they were beautiful, beautiful souls and beautiful little children. They turned and smiled at their mother. She couldn't see them, but I told her what I could see, and she was filled with joy. I was able to tell her that some of them were boys and some were girls, and also what they looked like. That made her so happy. The little souls told me to let their mother know that they have always been around her and would always be with her. "You know, I've always felt in the past that they were around me," the mother said to me. "Sometimes I even thought I felt their little hands touching my leg. I can even feel them now touching me." I had to smile because at that moment they were up around her chair and they were touching her. "Yes, they are," I said with a smile. "And you are blessed that you can feel the touch of your own little children whom God has sent to visit you. Remember, when the time comes for you to pass over, those 5 little souls will have their hands stretched out to you to bring you to heaven as well." "Thank you," the woman said. "I never told anyone about the presence of my little babies around me, and I never told anyone that I felt them touch me. I was afraid to tell anyone. I was afraid that people would think I was mad." One thing people must remember is that there are millions of people who are actually having spiritual experiences, but they are afraid to say so. There are plenty of people who believe that angels are there helping them and who actually sometimes feel them, but often they say to themselves, maybe I didn't see them. Maybe it was my imagination. It is wonderful to acknowledge the angels and to say, yes, I do believe in angels. Yes, I do believe in God. Many times we don't do this. Many times we only admit that these things when we are bereaved, very ill, or desperate in some way. Only then do we turn to God and pray. We are often afraid to acknowledge God and his angels. As you grow spiritually, you will find that you won't be afraid to acknowledge God, his angels, or any spiritual being that has come from the heavens. During the first few months of my pregnancy, Joe did not look well. He complained of a lot of pains in his stomach, and the doctor sent him to the hospital for tests. They said it was a rumbling appendix, but that he was not sick enough to operate. So he was sent home with medicine. Joe continued to be in a lot of pain and unable to keep food down. He lost a lot of weight that he couldn't afford to lose. I could see the deterioration in him, the gray around his internal organs that I had seen before we married had gotten darker, and around the area of his appendix, I could see a swollen mass of red. I told the angels that it was so unfair that Joe had to suffer like that for months and months on end. I begged them to help. The doctor said he could do nothing. He apologized to Joe, but said that the hospital wouldn't remove his appendix unless he was critically ill. I miscarried at 3 months. For about a week before my little unborn baby left, the angels kept touching my belly, and beams of light would flash straight out. Many times I asked, can my little baby not stay? But I was always told no. Sometimes Joe asked me why was I sad, and I would tell him it was just the hormones and to take no notice of me. I never told him what the angels had said. No matter how sick Joe was, he always tried to help around the house. On that fateful day, I had been helping Joe stack turf in the shed, and I told him that I wanted to go in and lie down on the couch, that I was tired. I fell asleep for a while, and Joe came in and said the job was done. All the turf was in the shed. The children stayed outside playing. I was going to get up to make tea, but Joe said he would make it instead. Joe was in the kitchen only a minute when I started to feel horrific pain. I could feel the life going out of my body. I called out to Joe urgently. He came immediately and sat beside me on the couch, and I said I looked very pale. He went into the bedroom to get a pillow to put under my head. I felt my soul holding my baby's soul and rising out of my body, going toward a beautiful light. I knew my baby had died and that I was dying too. I was rising toward the light, carrying my baby. The pain had gone. I was traveling through a tunnel of silver and gold, an enormous tunnel made of shiny white angels. I couldn't see the end of the tunnel as its path curved. I knew without being told that I was on my way to heaven, and I felt no fear, just tremendous joy. I could see other souls on their way to heaven too. They looked human in appearance and were dressed in brilliant white robes. I call the color white because I don't have any other word, but it was much more brilliant than the color we call white. Through their robes, I could also see the light of their souls. It radiated up through their faces, making them look more pure and radiant than they ever had been on this earth. When I got to a particular point, a beautiful angel stood in front of me and stopped me from going further. I knew without being told she was blocking my way, but she spoke to me in the sweetest, gentlest, and most compassionate of voices. Lorna, you know you should not have come with your baby. You must return. I don't want to go back, I said to the beautiful angel, but deep down in my soul I knew it was not my time to go to heaven. Turn around, Lorna, and look back down the tunnel, said the angel. As I turned, I could see Joe holding on to my still body, lying on the couch, trying to feel a pulse, a breath, shaking me, saying, come back, come back. You can't die on me. He was praying as he spoke. I turned back to the angel and said, no matter how much I love Joe and the children, I still don't want to go back to the human world. Why would I go? Here I am in the presence of God. Here I am perfect in every way. I feel unbelievably alive. I feel no pain and no sadness of any kind. Why do I have to go back?" "You have no choice," said the beautiful angel. "You have to return, Lorna." I looked at the soul of my little baby in my arms. He smiled at me. His blue eyes sparkled, and he was radiant with life. The beautiful angel in front of me put out her arms to take him. A powerful authority entered my soul. I knew I had no choice, that I had to go back, that I wasn't meant to be there. I kissed my baby, holding him very tight, and then, very reluctantly, I put him into the beautiful angel's arms. I really did not want to let him go, even though I knew that someday I would see him again, and that in the meantime this beautiful snow-white angel would take care of him. As soon as I had handed over my baby, it was as if God took hold of my soul and brought it back gently through the tunnel, back to the house in Maynooth, and to the couch where my body lay. My soul started to enter my body slowly, but the pain was horrific. I felt every pore, every organ, every bone, every bit of flesh and muscle. Life was being poured back into a body that had been dead for a few minutes. It was horrific pain, but for some reason, I am able to understand. I couldn't cry out. I couldn't make a sound. Eventually, I heard Joe's voice. "Lorna, thank God you are alive. I thought you were dead." I managed to give him a weak little smile. I lay there for hours with the angels holding me, and I wouldn't let Joe leave me, even to call a doctor or an ambulance. Deep down inside, I knew I was going to live, that I was meant to live. I never told Joe that I had died for those few moments. He did not need to know that, and it would only have frightened him worse than he had been already. Eventually, Joe went to the phone booth and called my parents, and they came up to the house. I asked Joe not to say anything about what had happened. All I told Mom and Dad was that I had been feeling unwell all day and had started to bleed. Joe and Da brought me into the hospital, and Mom stayed and minded Christopher and Owen. At the hospital, they were very concerned that I seemed so weak, and of course I didn't tell them all of what had happened earlier that day. They did a scan and said they could see nothing. There was no sign of the baby. The doctor came to see me, and he held my hand and said he was very sorry. "You lost your baby. It must have happened before you got to the hospital." As the doctor was leaving, Da walked into his own and said, "I'm so sorry you lost the baby. I know how much this baby meant to you." He had tears in his eyes as he talked with me. I had never seen my father so upset over something to do with me. The doctor said I needed to stay in the hospital, and when I was settled in the ward, Joe and Da went home. A few days later, they did an operation to clean out my womb. Joe came to visit me every night. He was worried about me and said that we had lost the baby. 2 weeks later, I was discharged, but I was still very weak and spent a lot of time in bed. I was so glad to get home and hold my children in my arms and hug and kiss them. It was years later that I told Joe more about what had happened that day, the day that I died and went some of the way to heaven and back. I told him as a way of consoling him in the last few months of his life. Many of us have a fear of death, but there is no need for it. At the moment of death, there is no pain, no discomfort. Some people may have pain right up to the last moment, but then there is none. You have no fear and anxiety. You go freely. Death is like birth. I know you might think that's a strange thing to say, but you are being born into a new life. You actually don't die. It's only this physical shell that you leave, like an empty eggshell. I know there is a place called hell. It actually exists, but God has never shown me anyone being sent there. I can only go by what I have seen myself, and from what I have seen, God forgives everyone, no matter what they have done. I know this is hard for us to understand. A lot of the time we look for justice and revenge, so it is very hard for us to understand. But when our soul stands in front of God after death, it feels so much love and desire to be with God that it wants so much to stay there, and it asks for forgiveness in a very deep and real way. Forgiveness for all that was done on this earth out of the frailty of the human condition. And God, in his infinite mercy, forgives his children. We are all nothing but children in the presence of God, who is our Father. Your soul is perfect. When your soul is free of your body, it can travel through the universe to places you could never imagine. How can I help you to understand how wonderful this feeling is? There is no way to express it, no way to tell you, unless you have experienced it yourself. And most of us have to wait until we die to do this. When you die, you are not on your own. You are accompanied all the time by angels and those spirits who have gone before you. You won't want to come back. Why? When you have no more pain, no more tears, no more sadness, would you want to get back into a human body? That is why when people die, they do not want to return. And the only thing that brings a soul back to a human body is God sending it back, because it is not yet time. We have become very materialistic as a society, and so frequently we look at death and ask, is this it? I rot away and there is nothing more? I assure you, there is more, much more. I hope that through the books I write, I can communicate this and help people to understand. Believe what I say. Believe that, yes, there is more, much more, even though I may not be able to prove it or show it to you now. It is proven to everyone when they die. Some people feel that then it's too late, if they have to wait to die to see the proof. People are given proofs while they are alive, but sometimes they have to look or listen very hard to recognize them. Chapter 17. 3 knocks on the window. Angels in my hair. A few days after I got out of the hospital, the weather started to get very cold. Joe was back working in the local county council, even though it was only a temporary contract. I was out in the shed getting turf for the fire when I heard my name being called. I turned around but saw no one. I brought the bucket of turf into the house, and there, sitting in the chair beside the fire, was an angel. He startled me because he was very striking, very different from any other angel I had ever seen. It was as if he was made of jagged glass, of perfect shattered splinters that were all identical in size and all reflected light. His face and his features very sharp, and as he stood up, he was about 12 feet tall. The ceiling seemed to have disappeared to allow him space to stand there. Very unusually, music seemed to come from every part of him. Enchanting, soft, mellow music, quite unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't human music, but the sort of music I could imagine hearing in heaven. "Hello, Lorna," he said in a very soft voice. "My name is Cephas. Something special is going to happen for you and Joe, but particularly for Joe." "Angel Cephas, can you tell me when?" I asked. "Soon, Lorna. You will know when the angels descend on your home." Then Angel Cephas rose out of the chair and was gone. Weeks passed. I don't know how many, and the weather got colder still. Joe remained very sad about losing our baby, and I was too, but I had known in advance, and so I had had more time to get used to it. The weather was getting very bad, and it was ice cold outside, really, really cold, and it was snowing extremely heavily. On his way back from work, Joe decided to get extra groceries, and I always remember him arriving at the door with his arms full of bags of shopping. As Joe walked he started to say, "God, it's cold." But as soon as he said the word God, angels descended on our little home. It was as if angels were coming through every part of the house, through the roof, through the walls, even up through the floors. Every atom of the house seemed to be full of angels. Something like this sometimes happens when something very special is about to occur. I knew this was that something special Angel Cephas had spoken of, something special for Joe. Joe continued, "You never know. Tomorrow morning, we might not be able to get outside the hall doors with that snow. It was stacking up pretty high outside, and there was a report on the radio about roads blocked and traffic not being able to go up to Lexsplit because the road was covered in snow and ice. That evening, we had the fire going. There was a power outage, so the fire was our only light, and I remember feeling nice and snug in our little cottage. The children were in bed asleep. We had plenty of fuel and food in, and it felt lovely. It felt safe. Around 10 o'clock, Joe and I were sitting by the fire enjoying tea, and sandwiches and talking about the baby we had lost. As we sat there, we gave him a name. The room was shining with angels, and I noticed some angels going into our bedroom. When they came back into our little living room, I heard them say of Christopher and Owen, "They are sleeping peacefully like little angels." Everything became silent. There wasn't a sound. I got up out of the chair and peeped out the window. It was pitch dark outside, except for the snow, which left a glow in the darkness. I was a little anxious and excited. I did not know what the angels were going to allow to happen, but I knew it was going to be special. The next minute, there came 3 knocks on the window. Of course. Joe and I nearly jumped out of our skins. He said, "Oh, God, somebody must be outside." As he was getting up out of the chair, 3 knocks came on the door as well. I said, "They must be freezing. Maybe it's Mom and Dad. Maybe they had come up for something." "They are out of their minds to travel on a night like this," Joe said. Joe was surrounded by a whole host of angels, but of course he didn't realize it. Suddenly I knew what was going on and started to laugh. Joe said, "Why are you laughing?" "There is no one outside the door," I said. "I know who that was." "Who?" asked Joe. "He was our baby," I said. "He was saying goodbye. He was just giving you a physical sign to help you to believe by knocking." "Go away out of that. Don't be talking such nonsense," Joe said. "Go out and open the hall door, and you won't see any footprints in the snow." I had to laugh again at the expression on Joe's face. The room was full of angels. I knew angels had brought my baby's soul to knock on the window, and know he had gone back with the other angels. I didn't need to see him, our little son. He had done this for his dad, to help him to believe. Joe opened the hall door. The snow was up against it. It was nearly a foot deep, and it fell onto the mat. The freezing cold air came in, too. Joe looked out, and he could not believe it. There were no footprints in the snow. He looked and he looked to see if he could find anything, any footprints in the snow, of animals, birds, footprints of any kind. He stepped out into the snow. Joe went white in the face. He couldn't believe it. He looked at me and shook his head, saying, "Oh my God, that's just too much." Eventually he came back in, closed the hall door, and I said, "Don't worry, sit down by the fire and get warm. That was your son, our baby, saying goodbye. He was leaving with all the angels to go to heaven, off to where he should be. Now you can let him go." Joe cried. There at the fire, we held each other in our arms, and we both cried. We were very peaceful, though. "Wasn't it wonderful that our little baby did that for us?" I said to him. "That the angels allowed something like that to happen so we would know that our baby's okay, that it's all right." That was our child, thanking us for being his parents. Da had a habit of dropping in to see us out of the blue, mostly in the evening. I always loved this. One day, I was out working in the garden, pulling weeds and hoeing between the rows of potatoes. We were now growing most of our own fruit and vegetables, and Christopher was helping me. Although he was only about 5, he was always anxious to help. As I heard Dad's car pull up outside the gate, I turned around. The 2 boys cried out, "Granddad!" Christopher ran through the potatoes and tried to open the gate, with Owen toddling behind. The gate was tied with string, so I picked Owen up and helped Christopher to untie the knot. The gate opened and Owen wiggled in my arms to get down. Christopher greeted Da, and he got out of the car. He was in fishing gear and wearing his favorite hat, a tweed hat with colorful fishing flies in it. He'd had the same hat for years. He wore it every opportunity he got, and he always treated it with loving care. Da greeted the kitties with a pet on the head. He always did that, and sometimes I would say to him, "They are not dogs you are petting, Da," and he would laugh at me. "The garden is looking great," said Da, as Christopher pulled him in the direction of the potatoes. "When the children are finished showing you all the vegetables we're growing, come in, and I'll have tea ready," I said. Owen, who was now about 3, was first back into the kitchen and arrived with a tumble and a roll. He had been born prematurely, and as a result of not having developed fully before his birth, his hips swiveled much more than normal. He could move so fast that I would hold my breath as I watched him, and he could tumble over 3 or 4 times and still end up back on his feet. It was as if he was double-jointed from the waist down. Many times when I saw Owen tumbling and I was holding my breath, I would see flashes of angels spinning around in every direction, protecting him. Seeing the way he tumbled, you would expect him to break bones, but he never did. The doctors in the hospital said that Owen's hips wouldn't develop properly before the age of 7, and I often said to Joe that I couldn't wait for Owen to reach that age so that I could breathe easily. "Lorna," my father asked, "would you and Joe and the kiddies like to come on holiday with your mom and me in the summer, down to the little cottage in Mullingar?" I was delighted. My parents had recently got enough money together to buy a little cottage in Mullingar, 50 miles from Dublin. Joe and I had never had a holiday. We had never even gone on a honeymoon. I was thrilled at the idea of a break. "That would be great," I said. "Of course we'd love to come. I hope Joe can get the time off." Joe had recovered from his appendicitis, but I could still see the red mass of energy around his appendix, so I knew it would flare up again. He had recently gotten a job at the local carpet factory. It was hard physical work in unpleasant conditions, washing and dyeing wool, and most of the time he worked the night shift. This work couldn't have helped his health, but we needed the money. One of the few benefits of this job, other than the small but regular income, was that Joe had access to cheap, undyed wool. I had done little knitting as a child, but now that I had access to this wool, I took to knitting with a vengeance. Even though all the jumpers I knitted were the one color, the color of sheep, I knitted Aaron sweaters for the children, for Joe and for Da. My Da loved his sweater and wore it a lot of the time he wasn't working. This day, Da and I sat down and had a cup of tea and talked for a few minutes. The children were delighted too. They asked their granddad so many questions about where the cottage was, what it was like, whether there were trees in the garden. The garden is wild, with lots of trees and grass as tall as you. There are lots of little lanes as well, all overgrown like a jungle. You'll have a great time. When can we go? They kept asking, and I told the children, not until your granddad and his dad get a holiday. Da had his tea and then went outside into the garden with the children for a little while. "See you, Lorna. I'm going now," he called out. The day before we were due to go on holiday was a really warm, sunny day with hardly a breeze. But as I was hanging washing on the line, this strong wind suddenly came up. I knew it wasn't any ordinary breeze, and I started to laugh. "I bet that is you, hostess," I said. "What are you doing blowing away my washing on me? What are you up to?" Then he just appeared. As usual, he was playing tricks and trying to make me laugh. Then he disappeared again, just like a light evaporating into the air. He is a wonderful angel. That day I caught my son Christopher standing there, looking in the same direction and staring, and I knew by his eyes that he saw what I saw. He never mentioned it then, nor since. Maybe he has forgotten about it. Maybe, though, when he reads this book, he will remember that I don't know. I will just wait and see. The day we were off on holiday, I was worrying how we were all going to fit into the car. Dad's car was not big, and we had a lot of luggage. The children were out in the garden watching anxiously for their granny and granddad, and when the car pulled up to the gate, the children let out such screams of joy. Christopher and Owen immediately climbed into the car with their toys, and Da and Joe somehow managed to fit everything into the trunk. Off we went toward Mullingar in County Westmeath, some 40 miles from Maynooth. Joe talked quite a bit, but I stayed quiet within myself and played with the children. We got to the cottage late. It was almost getting dark, but there was a beautiful full moon and a bright sky packed with stars. The little stone cottage was lovely, nice and cozy. I just felt happy to be there. Mom and Dad slept downstairs, and we all slept upstairs. I slept really well that first night. During that holiday, Da and Joe did a lot of fishing on different lakes around the area, and Da brought the children and me out in the boat too. The children were so excited about being on the water and the boat bobbing up and down, even though we only went a short distance from the shore and back in again. Da had had an accident in the garage a few years before, and since then he had been unable to do heavy physical work. Even though Joe wasn't particularly well himself, he did a lot of the work on the cottage that holiday that Dad couldn't do. I helped too. We put up drywall to protect the walls from the damp, which was a difficult job, as one of the walls was very high and the drywall was very heavy. On a couple of days, we worked all day until the evening, but by the end of the holiday, we had succeeded in finishing the job. On a few evenings, Joe and Da went fly fishing. One evening, I told Joe I'd like to go for a walk on my own, and I asked him to stay with the children. I wanted to be by myself so that I could really talk to the angels, not just quietly, but aloud, so that they could actually walk beside me in a physical human form. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening when I went off. I knew there wouldn't be that many people down by the lake at that hour. I crossed the main road and took a left turn down a minor road to reach the lane that leads to the lake. Instead of turning left for the lake, I decided to go straight on. And as I walked, I said to the angels, "Now you can walk alongside me. I know you are there in spiritual form, but I need you to appear in physical form so that I can talk to you." Angel Michael appeared beside me and walked in time with my step. He put his hand on my shoulder, and that felt good. As we walked along the road, Angel Michael said, "A little further up the road, Lorna, there is a forest to the right. Let's go for a walk there." When we reached the forest, it looked overgrown and very dark. "I can't go for a walk in that forest," I said. Michael took my hand, and as we walked, the brambles moved apart, and we had a path. We came to a little opening in the forest, looking down across the fields and the lake. Sometimes it is nice just to walk and know that the angels are right beside me and that I have nothing to fear. But that night, as I walked through the forest with Michael, I had a vague sense of something watching me. I didn't give it much thought, though, and I didn't ask Michael about it. Next morning after breakfast, Da invited Joe to go fishing with him again, and off they went with their fishing gear. I called after them to bring some fish home for our tea. Da said he'd try, but he couldn't promise, and they headed off down to the lake. Mom was busy out in the garden doing something or other with flower pots, so when I had cleaned up, I went off with the children down the boreen and where the trees were. It was a wild place, and they loved it there. Later, Mom and I went off walking with the children down toward the lake, enjoying the last day of our holiday. We talked to people we met on the way. Some were vacationers like ourselves, and some were local people Mom had gotten to know. When we got down to the shore of the lake, there were a lot of families there. The children and I played in the water. They enjoyed picking up stones, throwing them, and watching the splash and feeling the ripple of the water hitting their legs. There were tears when it was time to head back to the house. Shortly afterward, Joe and Da arrived home with some trout. Da took the trout outside and showed the children how to chop off the head and the tail and clean them up. "Ugh," the children went. "Ugh." "That's an easy thing to do," I told them. "I learned how to clean out fish and cook them as a child. It's great to know how to do it, particularly when you can cook them over a campfire." No sooner had I said this than Christopher wanted to build a campfire to cook the fish. Unfortunately, we had to say no because we were going back to Maynooth that night. We did eat the lovely trout, though, but we cooked them in the kitchen. As soon as we were finished tea, we had to clean up and then packed the car. We arrived back at Maynooth, and Mom and Dad went home. The holiday was over. We never had very much. I used to ask the Lord, how on earth do we survive? But we did. I always seemed to manage on a shoestring. I would count pennies and grow vegetables to make things stretch. There was no such thing as buying new clothes for Joe or myself. Every now and then my mother would say she had a bag full of clothes. I don't know where she got them from, but they never suited me. They were always too big and made me look like a granny. Sometimes, but not always, there might be trousers or jumpers in the bag that would fit Joe. We would laugh and say, "Beggars can't be choosers." Many times my engagement ring was a godsend. Pawnbrokers were a blessing for us. As for many families in Ireland at that time, there was almost always a queue. I remember occasions when we went into the pawnbrokers and came out with money in our hand, feeling like a millionaire. On occasions when we didn't have money for bread or butter, to put on the table, Joe would thumb a lift into Dublin with an engagement ring in his pocket and head straight for the pawnbrokers. He would get maybe £10 for it, and then over time, we would save up to get it back again. What a lifesaver that ring turned out to be. Joe was given a bicycle by a neighbor, an old man down the road who had asked Joe to help him clean up his house and garden. Out of gratitude, gave him his old bicycle. It only needed cleaning up and a few minor repairs. I thank God and the angels for the gift of the bicycle, and the old man for listening to his angels. Joe could now cycle to work at the carpet factory. Despite the shortage of money, those years were great. They were wonderful times when it was lovely to be alive, to see my children smiling, and to see Joe being able to enjoy life for a while. The summer after I lost the baby, Joe had a great idea. He went off to the bicycle shop in Selbridge and made a deal. In return for 2 weeks of cleaning the bike shop and sorting out all the bicycles and bits and pieces in the yard, everything, he would be paid 2 bicycles, an adult's and a child's. Then, when Owen on the back of Joe's bike, we could all go out outings together. So every evening after work, he went to the bicycle shop, and by the time he got home, it was after midnight. But it was worth it. At the end of the first week, he brought home a child's bike. It was badly in need of repair, though, and in many ways it looked like a piece of junk. Halfway through the second week, the man in the bike shop gave Joe the adult bike, and this one looked much better. Christopher was very excited about getting a bicycle, and with his help, eventually we got the bikes all fixed up. Christopher, who was a very skinny young lad at the time, was out there helping his dad, learning how to oil the chain and fix spokes and all that kind of thing. He also learned how to cycle very well. I always remember the first day we decided to cycle to Donata, some 6 miles away, for a picnic. Joe said 6 miles was a long cycle for a 5-year-old, so we'd have to see how far we got before Christopher got too tired. Joe had a seat on the back of his bike for Owen, and I had the bags with a picnic in the back of mine. I was worried about Christopher, but I shouldn't have worried, as he was well able. We did stop every now and then to have a little rest, though, or walk a little with the bikes. After that, we went to Donaday for a picnic as often as possible and had lovely times. The place was a stillness and peace, particularly in the evening time when everyone had gone home. There was also what many people called a lake. I called it a pond, with ducks, and there was a little bridge to a tiny island that had 4 trees and a few picnic tables, but no grass. On arriving, we would light a little campfire and make tea. The children loved sitting at the campfire on the island with the water all around them and the ducks coming up beside them looking for bread. We would have our tea and our sandwiches and look at the stars. I know we weren't really meant to light a campfire there because of the forest, but we were always very careful. Da had taught me a lot about campfires and about things to do with nature. When I was a child, he had taught me about lighting fires, about walking safely along a riverbank, about swimming in currents in the water. He had told me that there were rules about everything. One evening, when we were there, the stars were shining, and there was a full moon in the sky, so it was quite bright. There was no one else around, just us and the ducks. We had lit a little fire, and the children were eating their sandwiches and playing around. The little boys doing all kinds of things. I told Joe I would like a few moments on my own, and I asked him to keep an eye on the boys while I went for a walk. For some time I had been aware of something watching me from very far away. I wanted to talk about this with the angels. Joe protested that it was dark, but I replied, "I'll take the torch with me." I walked across the little wooden bridge onto a little path in the direction of the old castle, then right again to where there was a fair-sized lawn with a lot of trees around it. I went around the big oak tree so that Joe couldn't see me. I really wanted to be on my own, and I knew that he would be watching for me. Angel Elijah appeared, like a vibrant light, among the trees, and walked out into the clearing, calling my name. And as Elijah reached out toward my hands, lifted toward him, and he enveloped them in his hands. We communicated, but there were no words. "Lorna, he walks in the darkness," Elijah told me. "Don't be afraid. He cannot come any closer unless God allows him." "Do you know who I am talking about?" "Yes, Angel Elias," I said. "Satan." Is that who has been watching me in the dark? I have been conscious of someone or something's presence on the outskirts of my life, beyond the circle of light that surrounds me, millions of miles away in another circle of darkness where he hides. For the last 6 months I have been scared, even though I know that God and all of you angels are protecting me. Lorna, this is happening because one day God is going to test you by putting you in the presence of Satan, Elijah said. Where will God be when this is happening? I asked. God will be on your right and Satan will be on your left, said Elijah. God will be with me to give me the strength, I said. That is all that matters. But inside I was filled with an enormous dread and terror. Then Angel Elijah let my hands go, and as they fell to my side, I was filled with a feeling of peace and love. Elijah, smiling, gestured to me to look behind me, and then he disappeared. Joe came up behind me with the children. Christopher had his bike, and Joe had the 2 bikes, and Owen as well. Lorna, we have to go now. It's really getting late, he spoke in a quiet voice, as if not to wake any of the creatures in the forest. I didn't notice the time pass, I said. I took my bike, and we walked along the path and out onto the road. I felt very quiet and very still, very detached from the human world and my family. From that moment, I could feel that Satan was on his way toward me. It might take months or even years for him to come to me, but I was certain that we would meet. Chapter 18. Isn't Lorna lucky? Angels in my hair. One winter evening, Joe and I arrived at the prayer group in Maynooth. There were already about 25 people in the room, a lot of them young men. Johnny, a very spiritual person, welcomed everybody, and we all started to pray together and sing, which I always loved. Then everybody, including myself, went into silent prayer. You could have heard a pin drop. An angel whispered in my ear, Lorna, open your eyes and raise your head. Do you see the young man to the right? Yes, I whispered back. Lorna, you are going to share the young man's vision. Lower your head now and close your eyes, the angel whispered. I went into the young man's vision immediately. I was walking beside him along a winding, dusty road full of stones and holes. I could not see very far ahead because there was always another turn. He was walking for some time, but he always managed to avoid the stones and the holes. He seemed to be lost, but he wasn't really, because around the next turn was a building with steps leading up to the left-hand side. With great effort, the young man made his way up to the steps. It was as if they became steeper with each step. Slowly, he approached the door. As I watched his vision, it was as if the building had grown. From the road, it had looked a normal size, but now it was gigantic. The young man stood back in amazement. The door now in front of him was very big and heavy, and he was tiny by comparison. He wanted to go in, but it was going to take great effort. Using all his weight, he eventually succumbed and succeeded in pushing the door open and squeezed inside into an enormous empty hall that was filled with a great light. He sat down on the floor and began meditating, a tiny speck in his massive place. I felt the touch of the angel's hand on my head, and the connection between the young man and myself was broken. It is time for sharing, Johnny said. One by one, people started to share. Eventually, the young man who had had the vision started to speak. He described the vision as he had experienced it. It was exactly as I had seen it. This was the first time I had ever shared another person's vision in this way, and I was very excited about it. At the end of his description, the young man said he didn't understand what the vision meant. The angels asked me to speak. They told me that I must tell the young man the significance of his vision in order to give him courage to continue with his journey. I was nervous. I was terrified. I can't do this, I said to the angels. They won't listen to me. I'm just an ordinary person. The young man stopped speaking. The angels kept telling me I had to do it, and I kept giving them reasons why I shouldn't. Then another young man spoke, and the angels told me to pay attention and listen to what he had to say. There is someone at the prayer meeting to whom God is talking. This person is afraid and nervous. That is all he said. God was asking me not to hide anymore. I took a big, deep breath, just as Johnny said. If that is all the sharing, we will say a prayer together. No, I have something to say, I said. I turned to the young man who had had the vision and explained to him that the vision related to his fear of becoming a priest. I told him that there would be a lot of obstacles on the path that God had laid out for him, but he would overcome them. He would make a big difference, not just in Ireland, but in other parts of the world. He needed to have faith and belief in God and in himself, and he should take up his bag and go on his journey. I explained this was the message that the angels had given me for him. Then Johnny started to pray, and we sang and praised God. I really enjoyed that part. I was told by the angels that I had more to do at future prayer meetings, but I told the angels that I was dreading the thought of what they would ask me to do next. The prayer meeting ended, and we had tea and biscuits before Joe and I walked home. Joe made no comment about my having talked at the prayer group. A few months later, at another prayer meeting in Maynooth, Johnny said, "Let us all pray and ask for the healing that is needed within our families and for our friends or everywhere in the world." Everyone shared one by one. Some people had problems in their families or their friends had problems. People prayed for family members or friends to get well or for a daughter's success with an exam. There were also prayers for help with a much-needed holiday and a decision about a car. Miracles were asked to achieve a world peace, for governments, for help for priests and nuns and different charities. For so many things, it seemed a lot of miracles were needed. All the while, the angels kept tapping on my shoulder and saying, "Now, Lorna, you know what to say." I took a deep breath. "There is someone here," I started, "who needs a lot of prayer for her family. She has a brother who is married, and he suffers with an alcohol problem and is abusing his wife and children. This person loves her brother very much. There is a court case coming up to do with something else, and there is an awful lot of stress. God is saying to you that there is no need to be ashamed. Come and talk to him. Have faith and pray for everything to be all right." I finished. No one said anything else. Sometimes in prayer groups, certain people will lay hands on others and pray with them, sometimes out loud. Johnny then asked whether anyone wanted to be prayed over, and he called out the names of those who pray over other people. I was not one of them. I never had been, but that's not the way it turned out that day. God had other plans. People got up and walked around the room, chatting, and some went off to make tea. A nun walked to me. I smiled at her and said hello. It did not dawn on me that she was going to ask me to pray with her, but she did. "Would you mind praying with me, Lorna? It was me you were talking about, and I need to talk to God through you." I nearly lost my voice. "Yes, of course," I said, "but not in here with everybody. Can we leave the room and go somewhere else where we can be on our own?" "Of course," she said. We went out into the corridor and found an empty room 3 doors down. We went in and sat down together, just the 2 of us. Little did she know that I was shaking. "Oh my God, what are you doing?" I kept praying. Angels appeared all around us, whispering in my ear, "You are in God's hands, Lorna." I prayed over the nun, and I thanked God for the wonderful things that would change in her life. Then I said to her, "It's time for you to talk to God." She started to talk. She must have talked for about an hour. At the end, we prayed together. Every now and then, the angels told me to open my eyes and look at her. The angel who was with her, her guardian angel, was beautiful. I called her guardian angel the angel of peace and tranquility. I never told the nun I could see her angel, or that the angel had her wrapped in her arms with her wings around her, and that her angel was merged with her. I smiled, closed my eyes again, and praised God more. Then the angel told me to go back to the other room. When we got back to the other room, almost everyone was gone. Joe and I walked home. He said he was very surprised that I had spoken, and I told him I found it very hard because I was so nervous, but that I had to do what God had asked me to do, with the angel's help. That was the first time I had ever prayed over someone. I had, of course, prayed for many people before, but I always did so secretly, without their knowing. Joe's work at the carpet factory kept him out most nights. Many times, after the children were in bed, I would sit in front of the fire, take a deep breath, close my eyes, and when I opened them again, there were lots of angels sitting around the fire with me. I would talk to them about everything. I would tell them that one of the most wonderful things was that I could talk to them no matter where I was and know that they were hearing my words. I talked to the angels constantly. They were my companions, my best friends. When it got late, I would tell the angels that they had better go because Joe would be home soon and I had things to do. The angels would then disappear physically, but I would still feel their presence. Sometimes I would even feel an angel brushing against me. One particular evening, that is exactly what one angel did, brushed against me, and then appeared just for a moment. This angel smiled at me and touched my belly, saying, "God has granted your desire for another baby." Then the angel disappeared. Shortly afterward, I discovered I was pregnant. Joe was thrilled. He said it would be lovely if the baby was a little girl. I did not seem to have too many difficulties during the pregnancy this time, and I thank God for that. After Christmas, we decided to look at names for our unborn child. Joe said there was no point picking a boy's name this time. He was sure it was going to be a girl. We decided on the name Ruth. I went into labor about 10 days early and was admitted into the hospital. Then the labor stopped for a while. During this time, Mom and Da came into the visit and brought me some fruit. Da said he was looking forward to another grandson, and Joe told him it won't be a boy this time. Wait and you'll see, it will be a girl. When Mom and Dad were leaving the hospital, I decided to walk with Joe to the main entrance. Mom and Dad were ahead of us as my grandparents, Mom's parents, walked in through the doors of the hospital. Mom and Dad stopped to talk to them, and Joe and I said hello. We were standing about 2 feet away from Mom and Dad when my grandmother said to my parents, "Isn't Lorna lucky? Her boys aren't retarded like herself, or even worse. We expected this baby will be, though." Her guardian angel appeared behind her. There were tears in the angel's eyes, and he reached out and touched me, giving me strength. But I was devastated. I could see Joe, too, was shocked to overhear this comment. My grandparents had spoken to my parents as if we did not exist. I moved away with Joe's arm around me. "Don't mind them," Joe said. "They are ignorant people." He walked back to the ward with me. I was crying. Angels appeared all around my bed and filled Joe and me with peace and love. I asked Joe not to mention to my parents what we had overheard. What upset me most that day was that my father didn't defend me. I was deeply upset that he did not rebuke my grandparents, although I think I know why. He knew my mother's parents didn't fully approve of him either. They felt that Mom had married beneath her, despite all the progress Da had made. Da loved Mom very much. He felt he had caused a rift between my mother and her parents, and he was anxious not to widen it. I understood why Da hadn't defended me, but it still hurt. And I lay there that night crying my heart out. Years later, I discovered accidentally that Granny, my mother's mother, who had made those dreadful comments, had had a baby with Down syndrome. The baby had a bad heart and lived to be only 6 or 7. For all her short life, she was kept in a bedroom upstairs, shut away from all the neighbors. I was told they felt ashamed to have a retarded child. In the early hours of the next morning, I went into labor, and our little daughter, Ruth, was born on March 25th, on Mother's Day, and my own birthday. What a great birthday present. The day we were discharged from the hospital, Joe arrived with Christopher and Owen. The boys ran over to my bed, but Joe walked slowly. There were angels around him, supporting him. His guardian angel came forward and told me Joe was not well. I wanted to cry, but I knew I had to smile. Christopher and Owen were both fussing over their new little sister, wanting to hold her, and Joe took our little daughter out of the cot and let her little brothers put their arms around her. I asked Joe if he was okay, and he said yes, though I knew it wasn't the truth, and he knew it too. I told the angels that I was really worried about him, and I asked them to do anything they could to help. About 2 months later, Joe was working on the night shift when he got bad pains in his stomach. He went to his boss and told him he was feeling unwell and asked if someone could take him home. "No, you look fine to me," his boss said, and sent him back to work. The thing was that Joe hardly ever looked sick because he was tall and strong-looking. Eventually, though, he told his boss that he was going home anyways, that he was too sick to work. About 2 in the morning, the angels woke me, saying, "Lorna, get up. Joe is not well. He's on his way home. We are sending him help." I got up straight away, turned on all the lights, put on the kettle, and then got myself dressed. I stood at the window looking out, praying to God to get Joe home safely and somehow. Joe told me later that about halfway between Selbridge and Maynooth, he had collapsed along the side of the road. He remembered coming round and crawling on his hands and knees when suddenly the lights of a car shone on him. It was a neighbor from Maynooth who stopped, turned his car around, and got out to help. At first the neighbor assumed it was a drunk and could not believe his eyes when he recognized Joe. Joe explained he had a lot of pains in his stomach, and the man offered to drive him home. An angel tapped me on the shoulder. "Lorna, go and open the gates. Joe is almost here." As I opened the gates, the neighbor drove the car in. I helped him bring Joe into the house and put him into bed. He told me he would ring the doctor. "How can I ever thank you for being so good?" I asked. He told me that he hadn't been able to sleep and had decided to go for a drive, and now he was glad he had. I made Joe a cup of tea, and about 10 minutes later, when the doctor arrived, Joe was sitting up in bed, feeling much better. The doctor laughed at Joe when he saw him. "I hope you haven't got me out of my bed for nothing. I was told you had fits of pain and that you were found crawling on your hands and knees on the side of the road." "All the pain is gone," Joe said. "I feel fine now." They talked and joked for a few minutes, and then the doctor said, "Lie down, flat on the bed there. Maybe your appendix is acting up again." He put his hands on Joe's stomach, and instantly Joe shot bolt upright in bed, screaming with agony. "You are in trouble, Joe," the doctor said. "I'm going to send for an ambulance and write a note for the hospital." The angels continually amaze me. Who else do you think they were talking to that night but my Da? They told him to get up and go to our cottage. Da pulled into the drive behind the doctor's car just as the doctor was asking where the nearest telephone was. Da walked in asking, "What's happening?" The doctor told him that Joe needed to go to the hospital and that he was just about to call an ambulance. Da offered to take Joe to the hospital, but the doctor refused and said he needed an ambulance. Da went out and moved his car out of the way, and the doctor went down to the road to where was a public telephone. He was back in 2 minutes, saying that the ambulance was on the way. The doctor went back out to his car to write a note about Joe for the hospital, and I went into the kitchen, leaving Da with Joe. I was filling the kettle with water again when I felt the gentle hands of the angels caressing me, taking the anxiety out of my body, whispering that Joe would be all right and that he would have a tough time, but he would pull through. The doctor came back in, saying the ambulance had arrived. Da told me he would follow the ambulance in his car and be there for Joe. I, of course, had to stay with the children as I was still feeding Ruth. I gave Joe a hug. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll be home in no time." They had gone. I walked back into the room. The children were fast asleep, their guardian angels watching over them. I smiled back, knowing the angels had kept the children asleep while all the commotion was going on. I thanked them and turned around. Angel Hostess was standing in front of me. "Lorna, go to bed now," he said. "We're going to put you to sleep." I got into bed and did not wake until 10 o'clock the next morning, and the children slept too. While I was getting breakfast ready, Christopher came into the kitchen, asking where his dad was. I expected that he was in the hospital and that as soon as everyone had had breakfast, we would ring the doctor to find out how he was. I was feeding Ruth when my dad called in. The children were delighted to see him. I thanked him for last night and asked him how Joe was and how long he had stayed with him. Da had been in the hospital with Joe all night. Joe had been rushed into surgery, but he was now all right, although they had feared for his life for a while. "I will take you in every evening to see Joe," Da offered. I protested that that was too much to ask of him, but he insisted and said that Mom would look after the children. When I saw Joe that evening, he looked dreadful. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and then a few weeks later he was back in the hospital again for 10 days with an infection. After that, he was off work for almost 6 months. One day, when I was approaching the checkout in the local supermarket, the guardian angel of the little girl sitting in a shopping cart called me over. I knew the mother by sight,
but I didn't know her name. I said hello to the little girl, and her guardian angel told me that she was unwell and asked me to touch her. I touched her little hand as I greeted her mother and told her she had a beautiful child. The mother said goodbye and moved on with her daughter. The angels told me that a connection had to be made between me and the child so that she would get well. This is something that often happens, although I don't fully understand it. A year or so later, I bumped into the same mother and daughter, and again the child's guardian angel called me over to her. The mother told me her little girl had been unwell. She had been in the hospital, but now she was better. As the mother walked away with her little girl, the angels told me, "The little girl is going to get very sick, Lorna, but because of your touch, the strong spiritual bond that was made will give her the strength to pull through this illness. From now on, until she fully recovers, you will constantly see this little girl smile directly in front of you." During the following months, I would regularly see the little girl's smiling face in front of me. I would physically feel her sickness and her tears. Each time I would say a prayer for her, and I would ask God and her guardian angel to make her better. I know this little girl was critically ill. I was the child's lifeline. Somehow, spiritually, I kept her alive. I was by her bedside in spirit every time I was needed, and I did not let her soul leave her body. Suddenly, I stopped seeing her face, and I knew she was well. I thanked God and the angels and gave it a little further thought. Years later, I saw the mother and daughter walking down the main street of Maynooth, their guardian angels walking hand in hand with them. The little girl was now a teenager and was healthy and strong. I smiled, thanking God and the angels. One summer day, when Ruth was a few months old, I was out wheeling her in her stroller, enjoying the sunshine, when suddenly I felt the atmosphere change. There was an incredible silence. The air grew very still and it seemed to get brighter. I knew that an angel was coming. I was walking, but my feet didn't seem to be touching the ground. I felt I was moving, yet nothing around me was moving. I felt a presence behind me. I stopped and turned around, but I could see no one. I walked on. No sooner had I taken a step than I felt the presence again. "Whoever was walking behind me, please make yourself known," I said. There was no reply. "Don't do this. I hate it." I walked on very, very slowly, and then I felt a little tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was an angel there. He was just like a light, the same glowing and shimmering effect as if it were looking at a star, but many times brighter. I just said, "Hello." No reply. Sometimes I feel a little shy talking to the angels, and I think sometimes they feel shy talking to me. Communication is as important in the spiritual world as it is in the physical world, and sometimes just as hard. So I told him that it would be easier for me to talk to him if he made himself a bit more human looking. It was only when he did so that I realized it was Angel Michael. He turned himself into a very handsome man, maybe in the 40s, about 6 feet tall or possibly a little taller, with sharp blue eyes and long, dark, flowing hair to his shoulders. "Well, this time, you've certainly made yourself handsome," I said, and we both laughed. We started to walk along the road, with me pushing the stroller with the baby asleep in it. He told me he had come to talk to me about a book. A book, he said, the angels needed me to write, into which they wanted me to put certain things. I replied that deep inside I had known for some time that I had to write a book, but I admitted to him that I was scared to do so, as I was afraid of being ridiculed. "Lorna, the day will come when you will do this for us," Angel Michael replied. "It's now many, many years later, but the day has finally come, and this is my first book." Since the first time I saw him in my bedroom as a young child, Michael, that beautiful angel, has come and visited me regularly. He comes in and out of my life. Sometimes he comes and walks with me or sits down at my kitchen table. Other times he sits by the fire with me, saying that he needs to get himself warm. I laughingly tell him that angels don't feel the cold, but he always says that he can imagine how it feels because he has been around so many humans. We talk as if he is a human friend. Sometimes we talk about ordinary things, and sometimes we talk about very important things. Michael tells me that fewer and fewer people are asking for angels to help them. So we talk about the extraordinary fact that there are millions of angels out there who are unemployed. That's why this book is being written, so that people will realize that angels are walking beside them, that they are there all the time, that we just need to reach out and let them help. It's as simple as that. I listen to Michael and he tells me what to write. He tells me to write from my heart. God is pouring these beautiful angels out on this world for us, and yet many of us are ignoring them. We need to reach out and ask them for help. It's as simple as that.
Every single place of prayer is sacred, and the human race should feel safe within these places of prayer. They should all be protected. We should all strive towards having respect for holy places because they are sacred. It doesn't matter what religion they belong to. They belong to us all because we are all God's children, regardless of faith or nationality or the color of our skin, or whether we are richer or poorer. The more you pray in your home, the more your home becomes peaceful and full of love. But at certain times in our lives, we should go to a place of prayer. We should go to one of those sacred places that may be nearby or close to us to pray. All religions have certain times of the year that are sacred, and they ask people to come to the place of prayer to pray at that time. When a place becomes a holy place, a place of prayer, there are always angels, even if the human race or any religion turns around and says this place is no longer a holy place. It is, because the angels will always be there continuously praying. Again, in my travels, places have been pointed out to me where I was told people prayed for generations in a particular area, but they are no longer a place of prayer because that religious group deconsecrated them. But I have to say, I've always still seen angels there in prayer. I don't think you can take away the sacredness of a holy place, especially when God has allowed it to happen. A holy place is always a holy place, even if it is forgotten about for generations or hundreds of years. God has shown me that one day we all, as a people of the world, as one nation, will come under that one umbrella. We will all pray together as one. I cannot wait for that day. But today, in 2016, in today's world, it seems so far away. Mankind is still using God as a weapon to justify the evil in the world, to justify war, terrorism, and hatred. We have to stop hate and stop hating each other. We must stop looking for revenge and instead have love and compassion. We have to start to forgive, to love, to care, to strive towards justice and peace, for freedom and the right to love, to live life, to raise a family. We have to see the light of hope. God has the light of hope burning brightly in the world today, but mankind seems to have become blind to it. Just as I got in the door, my daughter Ruth called me on my mobile. My 2 grandchildren wanted to say goodnight and talk with their gran. We had a little chat. I told them I was really looking forward to their visit on Friday. They were going to be staying the whole weekend. I love when my grandchildren come to visit, especially when the weather is fine and they can be outside on the trampoline. I love their inquisitiveness about everything around them, especially when they help me to do a little gardening. We often go on an adventure through the fields to see what interesting little creatures we can find. I often ask the angels, could they not allow my daughter Ruth to see the angels with her children on the trampoline as they jump up and down? I know if every mother could see what I can see, they would just break their hearts laughing. Billy, Bob, and Jessica have great fun trying to do all kinds of acrobatics. But if you saw the angels imitating the children and pretending they are bumping into each other, you would burst out laughing. I have often counted 20 angels on the trampoline with my grandchildren and my daughter. This weekend I'm hoping that the sun will be shining so I can watch the antics of the angels with my grandchildren. Angels are always playing with children. Whenever I see children having fun, the angels join in the fun as well. Or if a child is sad or feeling left out, you will see the angels doing everything to give them courage and confidence to get up and join the other children and play. The angels try to get them to forget that they were feeling a little disappointed or shy.